Today I'm going to talk about the sixth house, Shatru Bhava, and many people have asked me about sixth house effects if you are going through a dasa bhukti of the sixth house and what it means. So I saw it fit to make a video, and so I'm not going to talk about that too much except for going right into it. So let's have a look at the slide pack that I've created for better understanding. Thank you. See you all shortly. All right, everyone. So this is the beginning of the slide pack where I give a very brief introduction to the sixth house. Obviously, we can go deep dive and look at the many aspects of it, like intensity of the 30 degrees in a house and roughly between 12 to 18 degrees. That is the middle part of the house is where it is most intense. Kind of like uh, an inverted sine graph. So if you can imagine that in the middle there's a where it kind of peaks, and toward the edges of it at 0 and 30 degrees it kind of comes down to almost an minimal intensity. So in the middle you have a peak intense feeling of that house, that particular house, and obviously we are talking about the sixth house in this video. And yeah, so there are many subdivisions you can go into, a very detailed and very minute analysis, which we are not looking at in this video. I would come up with several videos to talk about the sixth house. Sixth house is a very unique of the Dhustana houses. If you recall, Dhustana houses are the 6, 8, and 12 houses. 12 is the last house in our Vedic astrological system. So we have 12 houses. 6, 8, and 12, they are not favorable houses. They are designed to actually bring you down or bring you mishaps, misfortune, unpleasantness in your life. Also, they are the bearers of your karma from the past, right? So the floodgates open when you're going through a period of 6 house, 8 house, or 12 house, whether it's dasa, bhukti, andram sometimes, which is a subdivision. Also, 7.5 years Saturn, Ashtama Sani, Yaldra Sani, what have you. So sixth house is the topic of the day, and I'm just like I've mentioned, I'm giving you an introduction, just kind of like an exposure to what it is. So, as mentioned, it's one of the Dhustana houses. It is, if you look at it, if you think that the 12 houses take the form of a wheel, like a circle, and you're starting at house number 1, obviously 6 is the first Dhustana house you will come to. Then you'll go to 8, then you go to 12. 6 is the first introduction of Dhustana. So it is kind of like the lowest level of misfortune that can be presented to you. The middle one, house number 8, is the most difficult, the most challenging period. So Dhustana houses, they are unfavorable periods, and depending on who is the owner of your Dhustana houses. So let's take the 6th house, for example. For, I don't know, Mesha Laknam. Mesha Laknam, Aries, if that is your first house, obviously Kanya Bhava is your 6th house, or Kani, or Virgo. Virgo is your 6th house, and the owner of that house is Mercury. And yeah, you have to look at the aspects of what the planet Mercury represents, and you work out your methodology of carrying out a forecast for your clients based on that way. So sixth house is one of the Dhustana. What does it represent? It represents debt, uh, most likely with a bank loan, house loan, car loan, a lease. Such is the case. So you would get deeper into your debt at this time. There's also, depending on your age group, if you are above midlife, sickness and disease is the norm and is represented and brought by the sixth house. You also have enemies represented in the sixth house. What encompasses enemies is different for individuals. Enemies can be relatives who want to see you fall. Enemies can be people at your workplace. Enemies can be, if you're a policeman, for example, enemies are the criminals that you are so hunting them down. So, depending on context, is the person, enemies are the person or people who do not want to see a growth on your life path, if I can say it that way. That's a very good depiction of it. Sixth house, okay, although they are Dhustana and Dhustana is the bearers of negative things, such as these, it also represents work, such as being employed in a company, employment per se. If is employment per se is represented by the sixth house, meaning that if you have a very good sixth house, you're most likely someone who loves to work instead of someone who's doing business. Contrasting that, I put here, contrasting that of the 11th house is the house of business. So either or one of these houses, sixth house for employment, work, 11th house for business, one of them is bound to be stronger. So a good astrologer would work it out and should be able to tell you what you're doing right now, whether you're in business or you are working for someone, what kind of organization, and if in the future there is any opportunity to start a business and what kind of business. Of course, you have to see other houses, drishti, associations, and all those wonderful stuff in astrology. As I always say, astrology is a very, very complex. There's a lot of dots to connect. You can't look at just one house. Oh, obviously, sixth house, you can see someone who is employed or not, but what kind of employment is it, and what kind of job they are doing? Is it they are a doctor or a technician, someone who's working with machineries, someone who's a teacher? So that's the kind of profession. But you also can see the employment type, such as if they are full-time employed, part-time, casual worker, whether you can even see whether they love working or not. So all those stuff is evident in the sixth house. So I've given a very basic uh, overview or a representation. If Meena Lagnam is the representation of a native or of someone, of your client that you're looking at. This is Meenam Lagnam. Owner of this house is Jupiter. And sixth house, the owner is the sun. Obviously, you have to count clockwise. You have to count this house itself as one. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The Dhustana house is here. As mentioned, the owner of your Lagna is Jupiter. Sixth house is the sun. Now, there are clauses you have to put into your mind when you begin your analysis, such as Jupiter and the sun, they are pretty much friends. They are part of the same league as compared to Venus and Sun. They are in a different league. They are not friends. In fact, Venus really hates the sun. But Jupiter is kind of okay with the sun. But the sun although they are friends, Jupiter and Sun, they are friends, but the Sun is the owner of the sixth house. The Sun has to do the deeds of the sixth house. He has to carry out its objective, its function as the sixth house, which going back uh, a chart, a slide, sorry. So what does the sixth house owner have to do? He has to bring out all this for you. Also, representation of employment or business. Again, sixth house I've mentioned is employment. So you can uh, pretty much understand that since the sun represents government, kingdom, or that was for the ancient analysis. Nowadays, we say kingdom as in government. So you can, if this is a very positively placed house, although it's a Dhustana, if there is a positive planet inside here, right, like such as a full moon, you can um, forecast and predict that this person is most likely working for the government. Again, there are other subclauses you have to look at, like such as where's the owner, where's the sun himself placed in the chart, which house, which bhava he actually occupies. But then again, I'm just introducing the sixth house here. I'm not going into the many if-else statement to come up with your forecast and your analysis. Again, reading an astrological chart is a lot about what if. So if you can think of a flow chart, so there's a lot of combinations and options you can look at. But a good astrologer would have to weigh in the entire 12 houses, the placements, whether the planets are moving forward or in retrograde, where's the full moon, and also the phase of the moon, if it's actually full or is it a half moon, or if it's a new moon, there is no moon, such as a Amavasya moon. And that represents the mind and the clarity and strength of mind and how that person goes through life. All this you have to put into account. But then again, this video is all about the sixth house, so let us not go into tangent into other topics. Considerations. As mentioned, you have to know where the house owner is placed. Sixth house owner, as mentioned, this one is Simmam, and the owner is the sun. Where is the sun? Right, so I'll give some examples, and that would give you a context to understanding this sixth house definitions. Association of the sixth house, meaning that planets within and casting a drishti. Maybe inside here, the owner is the sun, but the sun is probably here in Vrichigam. But maybe there's another planet there. What if Sunny is here? Saturn. Sunny is a malefic planet, and sixth house is a Dhustana house. So a shadow planet sitting in a shadow house, it's not good. So if you're going through a sixth house dasa or a bhukti, you can expect that that person, that the native is going to experience a very negative period. But what if you get a positive planet here, such as Jupiter sitting there? So you have to look at, you can't just say, oh, you are going through a sixth house dasa, meaning that you are going to experience hardship. Not necessarily. What if sixth house is good and you're supposed to experience good? What does good actually mean for a Dhustana house? Well, let me explain with one example. I have mentioned, let's talk about placement of the sun. This is the the natural house that the sun occupies, and he's 12 houses away, although it looks like he's one house away, but you always have to look at the chart in a clockwise fashion. So we are going one full circle around, coming back here, so that's 12 houses. So 12 In the Vedic astrological system, it represents losing something or a loss. So the sun is 12 houses away from its own house. It kind of loses its strength. So what does that mean? It has weakened its aspects for sickness, debt, and enemies. Again, it has lost its power to make this house strong. Let's forget about all the other planets that has to be taken into account. I'm just giving you an overview so you can start um, creating a framework of how to look at the sixth house. But again, the disclaimer here is you have to look at the entire placement of all the 12 houses, the entire placement of planets, and how they are looking at the sixth house, how they are aspecting the sixth house. But let's say this is the only thing that we are looking at. Sun has lost its strength to be in his own house. It doesn't like losing. Sun doesn't like to lose its strength. It doesn't like to be in the 12th house away, to be honest. But if its own Simha house happens to be the 6th house for someone, it loses its sense to give you sickness, debt, and enemies. What does that mean? This is actually a good uh, element, meaning that you don't have sickness, you don't have debt, you don't have enemies. Your enemies won't be good. They won't be in a good state of mind. Or you can say that you won't have enemies, which is in looking at a negative for a Dhustana. So it's like negative, negative, which is positive, right? Dhustana houses is a negative thing for a native, as I've mentioned. Now it negates that, it takes away that. Because why? 12 houses away, the owner has lost his energy. So you don't have sickness, you don't have debt, you don't have enemies. But just for contrast, if this happens to be the second house for someone and sun is 12 houses away, second house represents what? Speech, family life, income, or the ability to make income. You lose that. Second house is a positive house, although we call them sometimes they are the Maraka house, which we won't get into that. Second house is positive, but 12 houses away is where the owner is placed, so it's a loss. 12 houses, so it's a negative to a positive, it's negative. So you lost your ability to make money, you have lost your family orientation and all those things. But for a Dhustana house, losing something is good. Another example, the Lagna owner is Jupiter, as I've mentioned, and let's say Jupiter is positioned in the sixth house. What does that mean? Instead of losing your strength, there is an increase of strength. That means sixth house has become stronger, which is not good. There's a heightened aspect for sickness, debt, and these enemies, meaning that you have good enemies. They love to be your enemies. They are well off and they want to be your enemies. You have good debt, right? And you have good sicknesses. Good, good, good. That means these things linger on in your life if you are going through a sixth house, dasa, bhuktis, sub period, antram. So I hope you guys are getting the gist of it, right? A good planet in a Dhustana house is actually a negative thing. However, as I've mentioned, it also represents employment, right? If Jupiter is here, you have good enemies, good disease, good debt in your life, but you also have a good prospect for work because sixth house represents the only positive thing that sixth house represents in the current era. I mean, that's not the only positive thing. In the current era, year 2021, work is what most of us are going after. And most of them who come to me, most of my clients who come to me, they ask about work, opportunity for work, and when that will happen. So I look naturally at the sixth house. Jupiter, sixth house, good for work, getting employed. However, Now let's go to a third example. Let's say Venus is in the sixth house. Venus has 50% of the goodness of Jupiter. Jupiter is the most positive planet in anyone's chart. Venus is 50% positive planet, which is good. So the next person who can give you a good energy is actually Venus. Let's say Venus is here, but Jupiter, so now I'm looking at two planets. Now Jupiter is in the 11th house, as I've mentioned. 11th house is house of business. 6th house is house of employment. So why is 11 the significant bhava for business? Well, it's the sixth from the sixth. This is the Bhavat Bhavaham methodology. What does that mean? That means from the sixth house, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 houses from the sixth is 11th house. Always remember you have to start with the own house or from the house you're counting from. So you have to count. You have to include that house. So 6 from the 6th is 11th. So what does that mean? Right? This is more positive. As you can imagine, Jupiter is more positive than Venus. So naturally, the person will be in business. Provided, again, provided that the person is going through a 11th house dasa or bhukti. Dasa is preferable. But again, you have to look at all the nuances of astrology. If you guys recall, Jupiter is in its lowest point here. Jupiter actually exalts, right? He's in his highest point over here, and naturally 7 houses away opposite is here. It is its lowest point, or we call it Nicham, right? Debilitated house. Forgetting all that, just looking at 611, right? You will be in business, but there will be debt, disease, enemies. Why is that? This is a positive planet anyway. Now, this is the so-called judgment call you have to make when it comes to 611 analysis. Naturally, this is stronger. Again, I said, if else statement. If this has to happen, else this is the combination has to happen. Again, Jupiter can be retrograde here, right? Venus and Sun in the same house, and Venus sort of gets combust and loses its energy. Forgetting all that, just looking at this. 11th house is more positive than this. This is 50% positive, 100% here. So 11th house is better. The person is in business, but think about this. To be in business, most likely you would have a bank loan, a debt you would have gotten, whether it's for a car or for the business itself, right? You most likely would be sleeping less and more prone to diseases. You would have definitely business enemies, right? Stringent as you try to be to avoid this, naturally 50%, 100% energy. But they are both positive nonetheless. But recall what I said. You have positive energy here in the sixth house. What happens? You have good enemies, good disease, good death. Bound to happen. But 11th house is there, more positive than this. You are in business. This will drive itself upwards. You get better and better business volume, but your volume in your debt, health, degradation in health, and your enemies also goes up as this goes up. It kind of is like a balancing act when you think about it. In reality, when you think about it, someone is working hard in his business, in his or her business, naturally getting less sleep means he or she is putting on weight, and all the complications of health, not eating on time, and you going heavily in debt, unable to pay the installments or the contracts of the bank, right? And of course, enemies naturally. Again, this is a very, very broad-ended term, but enemies, you can take it to mean business rivals, including staff who are not cooperative. You know, they come late, they leave early, they don't follow the vision and mission of your company, of the business that you're trying to run. Again, they you would attract these kind of employees to come and work for you if you're a business owner, if you're in this kind of setup, for example. Special aspects, Lucknow with the same owner as the sixth house, for example, Rishabham or Vrichikam. Let's look at Rishabham here. First house, Lucknow, and 6 houses away is here. And we know that the owner of these two houses is the planet Venus, right? The same, if you are Vrichaga Rasi or Vrichaga Lagnam, and 6 houses away is this place, which is Mesham. So the owner of these two houses is the same planet, Mars. So owner here is Venus, owner here is Mars. So your Lagna Lord is also the Lord of the Dhustana house here. So what does that mean? That means if you are a Rishabham native, that means you don't need any external enemies. You yourself are capable enough to bring down your own life. You will miss opportunities, right? You will hate yourself if you don't do something. There's a lot of sense of regret, right? You would, when everyone is coming out from the stock market, for example, that's when you want to go in. You know, your own, if you are going through this sixth house uh, dasa bhukti, which is Sukra dasa, Sukra bhukti. So it goes half and half because we know Sukra dasa is 10 years. Half of that time, 10 years, sorry, Sukra dasa is 20 years. Sorry, 10 years of that, he he will do the elements, he will carry out the elements of the first house. The next 10 years, he will take on the sixth house. Again, depending on the proximity of where Sukran is placed. So which 10 years will happen first? That depends on the placement of Sukran, whether he's closer to this side of the chart or this side of the chart. Closer to this, for example, if Sukran is here, he will carry out this one first. So he will do the Lagna Lord's duty first. So you will see that that person has a positive beam of light about that person because he's the Lagna Lord, and Sukran represents, amongst other things, Sukran represents beauty. Suddenly, this person for that 10 years will look very beautiful, very attractive. I mean, if it's a female is beautiful, male is attractive, a very calm, very pleasant ambience about that person. But the next 10 years, it'll be a struggle and there will be enemies, death, disease, right? The person would be having problems with their reproductive system, for example. I mean, I'm skipping a lot of subtopics to get into that. There's a lot of readings and analysis, but I can pretty much tell you that that person who is going through sixth house for Sukra, Dasa Bhakti period, would have some problems with the reproductive organs. Same for Vrichigam and Mesham, Mars, right? So this person need not have any external help for disease and enemies. They themselves are capable of hurting or harming themselves. So how do you read all this? Well, these are the special aspects that I just put it here as part of the slide pack. So just to give you all an understanding of sixth house and the functionalities of reading them. We saw 611 as in business and employment. We saw debt, disease. We saw losses of a sixth house, which is good. But if the sixth house has a positive planet sitting there, it's bad, right? Again, there is an exception to the rule. bad for you to get debt, disease, enemies, but good for your employment. So again, I've given you all a very basic overview, but you have to actually do your own research, look at charts, other people's charts, your family, friends, and if they are going through or if they have gone through a sixth house dasa or bhukti, try and analyze what they actually experienced and draw the conclusions from that into your own chart reading capabilities, and you will get better. The more charts you read, the better you'll get. So that is where I'm at with the sixth house. I hope you found it informative. And I wish you all a very good year, a good life moving forward. Right. So as usual, please subscribe, hit like, leave a comment, follow if follow my videos. Do spread the words, and even if you have a uh, in your mind to be a negative comment or feedback, by all means leave it down below, and let's look at it. And I wish you all the best. Thank you.